Okay, what we want to do in this video is continue on our discussion about production being wealth, and then we're going to get more into detail regarding why certain countries are rich versus other countries that are poor. So as I said, this is certainly the continuation of the series of Money and Wealth, and this is the third video in that series. So again, hopefully you're sick of me saying this: production is wealth. We've said that a number of times. The more that is produced in an economy, the richer everyone is on average. And the reason is because there's more stuff, more goods and services to share around the residents of that country. That is absolutely 100% true. That question should lead on to this question, which is, okay, that's fine. So what produces goods and services? That is the next logical step, I would argue, in our understanding of a country or a nation's wealth, and dare I say it, even a person's wealth too. And the answer to that is the factors of production. Okay, so what are the factors of production? The factors of production are those resources which are used in the production of goods and services. They are those things which are used to make things. As I always say, they are the things used to make stuff. Okay, so, that's obviously being oversimplistic, and let's have a chat about that. What's the stuff that these things are making? We're talking about consumer goods, because don't forget, our wealth is down to what we can consume, and the more we can consume, the richer we are. So these are the things that are used to make consumer goods, and dare I say it, to confuse you a little bit more, but they can also be used to make more factors of production themselves, but I won't go into that now in a second. So that's what the stuff is: consumer goods. What are the things that are used to make these consumer goods? The first one is land. Second one is labor. Okay, the workers, the effort of the workers. The third one is capital, the machines. But I'm going to have to make a distinction in another video between physical capital, human capital, so on and so forth. And the last one is enterprise, putting up my favorite entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, who unfortunately is no longer with us anymore. Now, this is the point. The greater the quantity and the quality of the factors of production, the richer a nation is. So we've said land, labor, capital, and enterprise. Essentially, it comes down to a number of things, right? But when we're just talking about factors of production, essentially it comes down to capital per worker. Okay, the more and better quality that each worker has, the richer a country is in the long term. So let's look at this. So in this painting, what we have here is 4 lads and 1 lady, but the 4 lads is where we're going to bring our attention to, and the reason is because they are farming. Now, what are they farming with? So we have labor here, we have land here, we have the capital that they're holding, this scythe, and then the entrepreneur. I don't know where the entrepreneur is. Maybe it's this lady here. I have no idea. Okay, now, you have to ask yourself, production as well. That's not a question, that's a statement. You have to ask yourself, where would more be produced? In this scenario here, or this scenario here? Which do you think is a third world way of doing something? And I'm not having to go with the third world, just to be clear. They're in a very unfortunate situation, and there's a million different reasons for their situation. But I'm just saying, which is a third world situation and which is a first world situation. What's the difference between this photograph and the last photograph? I'm quite sure there are 3 people in this photograph. The person driving this, 1, 2, and 3. In the last photograph, there were 4 guys working. Here, there's only 3. Which do you think is going to produce more food? And then the next step is from that onto something as incredibly mechanized as this. Where do you think is the first world, and where do you think is the third world? And what is the defining feature? And as I said, I do think it really is capital per worker. Okay, absolutely. Now, think about this. We've talked about the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and enterprise. And we've also said that they are the ones that are the things, the items, the things used to make stuff. They are the things and people that are used to produce the goods and services that you and I enjoy. The more goods and services that a country makes, the more stuff, the more consumer goods that the residents of that country can enjoy. Now look at this here. An incredibly advanced, technologically advanced and mechanized form of production or production process. I can't see one human being here. Okay, now people say, "Oh, that's terrible. That's, the South Park attitude. They took our jobs." All right, losing your job to a machine surely can't be good for you, at least mentally. But just think about this for a second. If we had people producing cars in this manner, versus, or like producing cars versus producing cars in this manner, where do you think more would be produced? Which process? And I hope you'd see the highly mechanized process would most likely produce more cars, and it absolutely does. There's no disputing that. Okay, it's expensive, but it does it. And then you say, "Oh, that's terrible though, because the factors of production, some of the workers are going to be fired." And I say, absolutely. And I'm not a cold-hearted person. That is terrible. But then what do those people that are fired? What do? Well, they go off and try and get a job producing something else. Notice the word that I said there, producing something else. So if we leave machines produce all the cars, and then the people that were producing cars can find a job producing something else, what happens to total production in the economy? It rises. When total production in the economy rises, and let's assume, ceteris paribus, all of the things staying the same, that the population remains the same, what happens to the average standard of living? That rises too. Okay, so keep that in mind. The more goods and services that a country makes, the higher the standard of living, the more consumer goods that each consumer can afford, the richer people are in that country. If we have a highly mechanized process for producing cars, we have a lot more cars. If we have a lot more cars, there's more chance, or more cars to spread around per person. There's a greater chance that each person can afford a car. And as I said, I'm Irish, so a bit of paddy whackery here, and that means that most likely at least material needs are being met at a greater rate than they would be if less cars were produced. And as such, everybody's happy. Now, this is absolutely 100% true. It's so true I put it in capital letters, but I will give a caveat. This is in the long run, okay, in the very long run. The amount of money in a country does not make any difference to the wealth of that country. 100% true. I know that if you have loads of money yourself personally, you are richer than somebody that has less. That's going to be the next video that I discuss. But from a country point of view, it is only production. It is only the use, the efficient and total use of factors of production. Okay, we want our factors of production to be used fully, and we want them to be put into their most productive role. All right, so we don't want unemployment. That's why one of the goals of government is full employment. Okay, because we'd be giving up on what these workers who are willing to work, who desire to work, but aren't working, what they could be producing. Where that's a cost to society, what they could produce if they were in a productive job. So the amount of money in a country does not make any difference to the wealth of that country. If money made countries richer, then any developing country could just drag itself out of poverty by simply printing more money. And we have seen the effects of this in the past, those that have studied economics. It is a failure. It is guaranteed to fail unless you stop it. And a great modern-ish example is Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe used to be ruled by a dictator called Robert Mugabe, this gentleman here. And what he did was, and we will go into how he did it in later videos, is that he caused inflation. He printed a lot of money. He printed so much money. Now look at this guy here. This is all Zimbabwe dollars. Look at how much money he has. You've got to admit he's rich. Look at how much money he has. Well, the questions always come back to production. The factors of production, what do they produce? Money only has value depending on what it can buy you. The more that is produced, the more that each euro or tigrit or US dollar or British pound or Japanese yen can buy, the more valuable that currency is. Look at the next slide. This is a $100 trillion note from the reserve, the Central Bank of Zimbabwe. And look at these guys here, starving billionaires. Why are they billionaires? Because they've got so much money, so many Zimbabwe dollars that they literally are paid billions. Why are they starving? Well, the reason is there's not enough production. You can go in with a wheelbarrow full of money into a Zimbabwe supermarket, But this is the scenario that you're met with. Look at this here. It doesn't look like a huge amount of things on these shelves. The reason is that the inflation caused such a distortion to the economy. Don't get confused. We will talk about this later on. But inflation caused such a reduction in production that they couldn't keep food on the shelves. And please feel free to Google Zimbabwe supermarkets and go onto the images. You'll see many things like this. This, on the other hand, is the supermarket near me, Dunnes Stores in Cornels Court in Dublin in Ireland. There seems to be quite a bit of stuff on these shelves, I have to say. Just looking around, all of these shelves are absolutely jam-packed with produce that's fresh and delicious and ready to go. But what's the story? If I walk into a supermarket in Zimbabwe with all of this money here, what am I greeted with? Empty shelves. The reason, again, and I'll say it always, it's down to production. Printing money, not only does it not have any positive effect, but invariably if you do a lot of it, which Mugabe did, it has a very big negative effect on the country versus a country in Europe with stable inflation, again back to Dunnes Stores, Cornels Court. Now, the reason why developing countries are so poor is because their countries produce very little goods and services. Let's think about this. Having a look at this scenario, I feel for the people in this photo. I certainly do not wish to suffer their lives. It seems to be a very tough life. I don't feel sympathy for the people living in these houses. In fact, I'm rather envious and I would love to live in those houses. What explains the disparity? Okay, well, in the first photo, we have people, the factors of production, land, labour, capital, and I don't know who the entrepreneur is, maybe it's this person here, okay, producing goods and services, in this case crops, in this way. Not a very productive way. Nothing to do with a lack of effort, nothing to do with a lack of commitment, nothing to do with lazy workers, nothing to do with it whatsoever. Excuse me. Essentially what I'm thinking is the capital isn't enough or good enough. Compare that with the situation in America. Where is more going to be produced? In America or in the third world? Obviously in America. Something like 3% of the American population are involved in agriculture and food production. They produce so much they could probably feed the entire world. When you have so few produce so much, what do the rest of the population do? The other 97%. They find jobs producing other things. What allowed only 3% to actually produce so much? High quality factors of production, particularly capital, and also the extensiveness of the land. Okay, I taught in a school in Kenya, Marsabit, northern Kenya. This is the standard of the classroom. Invariably, I have to say, the less opportunity available to children, seemingly the harder that they work. I do agree with that. But what we have here is just, chalk and talk. Nothing wrong with it. But let's compare it to this scenario here, which I believe is in South Korea. iPads, students working, teachers, everything. The reason for the differences in education services in a third world country versus a first world country is production. The reasons for the differences in healthcare services in a third world country versus a first world country is production. The reasons in for the differences between the provisions of the state in retirement, let's say in a third world country versus a first world country, is production. These poor countries produce very little goods and services, very little consumer goods and services, because they have so very few factors of production. So at this stage, we should know that consumption is our definition of how rich we are, or wealth. We can only consume what we produce, therefore the more we produce, the richer that we are. And it's the factors of production that produce the goods and services that we can consume. Therefore, the more and better factors of production that we have available to us, the richer that a country is, provided it uses each of them to their full potential and in their best productive use. We've also said that in the long run, the quantity of notes and coins makes no difference to the amount of goods and services that can be produced in an economy. It is literally down to the factors of production. And finally, we've also said that if you increase the quantity of money in an economy very, very quickly, it tends to cause inflation, which has disastrous effects. We're going to be coming back to a lot more of these ideas in the next 2 videos, but we're going to have to revisit these over and over again throughout the course.